Welcome, everyone, on this rather chilly Sunday afternoon with a lot of wind blowing, but it gets us kind of in mood for Christmas, I think, and I'm happy to be with you. We begin this little time together in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We ask the Lord's grace upon us this day that we too might prepare for his coming in the world as Mary did, and we ask for this grace in Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you today, since we're getting close to Christmas, about the role of Mary and the incarnation. That is, the God taking on human flesh. The word carnis in Latin means meat or flesh. So we call God taking on flesh the human experience. That is the incarnation. That actually occurs not at Christmas. It occurs at the Annunciation, 9 months before Christmas, when God takes on human flesh in the womb of the Virgin. But obviously, the Nativity of Christ is a major event in that incarnation. But the role of Mary, first, we'll get into this a little bit. And the Franciscan order had a particular approach to this, which after many centuries, and I think it was about 6 centuries roughly, the Catholic Church throughout the world finally agreed with us. Yay, okay? So it took hundreds of years, but this is how it started. Okay. Most of the theological tradition of the order is rooted in the work of Blessed John Duns Scotus. And his theology and philosophy that he developed as a medieval scholar is called Scotism. And Franciscans are noted for being proponents of Scotus. There were other religious groups that fought this, in fact still do, even some, but the Jesuits are not among them. When they came along later, they kind of agreed with the Franciscans on this one. Okay, so Scotus was born in Scotland. He died in 1308 in what is now Cologne, where he was teaching. And he was a famous professor in the Middle Ages. He's called Scotus because he was from Scotland. Scotus is a Latin nickname meaning the Scot, basically. His family name was Duns, and we have an English word similar to that, sand dunes. You get it? Okay. So it's like a hill. So we call it a dune is a hill of sand. In Scotland in the Middle Ages, a dune was a hill, period. Okay, so Jack Hill, if you will. John Duns Scotus would be known as Jack Hill among us today. Okay, and this friar entered the order. He studied at Oxford and he taught at Paris, Cambridge, Cologne, other places, but he died pretty young. Now, the dogma of the Immaculate Conception was strongly developed by him. This is often confused with the virginal conception of Jesus. That's a different thing. The Immaculate Conception refers to St. Anne becoming pregnant with Mary. It does not have to do with Mary becoming pregnant with Jesus. That's not the point. Okay? Those two things are not related directly. This dogma, Immaculate Conception of Mary, teaches that Mary was conceived in the womb of her mother, St. Anne, without being affected by original sin. That's what the doctrine is about. So that also means, according to Scotus, that Mary's ability to choose the good, her freedom of will, was intact, and that her human nature was fully gifted by God with all the gifts of the original human natures of Adam and Eve. All of us, none of us have that, because we're all affected by original sin. That humanity chose a kind of disintegration with God, and that's affected every one of us in this room. So, our will and our intellects, for example, sometimes are at war with each other. Like, okay, my intellect tells me do not eat the third donut, okay? My will says go ahead, you know? So your will and your intellect are kind of disintegrated. And we have to battle that throughout our lives. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. But Mary, because of her role in holding God within her body, is different. Mary has the gift of a perfect human nature, not affected by sin. Why? Okay, that's a whole other question. But I want you to get this. Mary's human will and her intellect were not affected by sin. And that's natural. Adam and Eve had it. They blew it, but they did have it at one point. So it is natural to us to be able to have that kind of relationship with God. As we know from the Old Testament, from the book of Genesis, it talks about Adam and God walking in the garden in the evening, talking to each other. They're metaphors for human and God having a warm, friendly kind of relationship. That got affected by original sin. Mary will not be affected by original sin, and we'll get to the reasons why. So Mary's freedom to choose the good was completely intact. Yours and mine is beat up a bit by this disintegration that we're all affected by. Hers was not. Okay. So this is the dignity, if you will, and the perfection of human nature before original sin. So it's as if God is starting over with humanity in her. It got messed up in the Adam and Eve story. Okay, let's start over. Go back to reset, reboot, and if you will, God rebooted the giant computer in the sky, and we start over with Mary. All right. Now, many theologians argued against the acceptance of this dogma for centuries. The reason for it is really not hard to figure out. What they were trying to do is protect what Christ does. That Christ redeems all of humanity, not 99.9% of it, but all of it. That's what they were trying to protect. I think they got off on this one, but anyway, they were struggling on that. A lot of other theologians, and this particularly comes up more so in the Reformation with John Calvin and people who followed Calvin in theology, Luther also, felt that human nature was ruined by original sin, not damaged. Catholic theology, it's damaged, it's not ruined. Luther, you're ruined. Too bad. It's over. Catholic theology, you're damaged. You're not ruined. It reminds me of the plaque on the front of the church here where it says, destroyed by earthquake in 1925. Well, it wasn't destroyed, it was damaged. Okay? The towers fell apart, the rest of the church was fine. Why did they pick the word destroyed? I don't know. It's kind of stupid, really, because it implies that the building was flattened, and it wasn't. Okay, so you get the difference between ruined and damaged. They're not the same thing. Got it? Catholic theology, you're damaged. Okay. Now, the basic theological question for Scotus and the Franciscans to answer was, how do you uphold the universality of the redemption of Christ? How do you hold that up? Because we believe that's true. And the natural goodness of human nature at the same time. Got it? Okay. So many religious people were and are convinced that human nature is utterly depraved. I hear this all the time in Christian songs with popular singers, you know. I'm no good, Jesus is good, Jesus takes me and makes me good because I'm no good, and, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, it goes. Well, you're not perfect, but you're not totally ruined either, okay? We've all got problems to work on, but that doesn't mean we're total wreckage, okay? We've got something going on all the time and good. Okay, so Scotus, remember this friar, he dies in 1308. He'll start at the foundation. Okay, the incarnation, that is, God choosing to take on human flesh, is an absolutely free act of God. God does not have to do this. As soon as you come up with something that God has to, well, then you've lost the idea of God. God is free. God doesn't have to create. God doesn't have to incarnate. God doesn't have to save from sin. God doesn't have to. God doesn't have to do any of it. Okay. The only logical thing we can posit that God has to do is be the highest good. Because if he's not, then we don't have anything we can talk about. It's ridiculous. Okay. So God doesn't have to do things. God could have acted in some other way besides the incarnation to save humanity from sin. But this is the way God chose to act. Must be the best way, but, I have suggestions. You could have done it this way or that way. Okay. Anyway, God chose the way God chose. As St. Bonaventure noted, God could have saved humanity from sin by a nod of the head. Poof, saved, done. But God chooses not to act that way. Okay, got it? So God didn't have to incarnate. So we'll work on the incarnation a bit too here. But don't come up with the idea that God has to incarnate. As soon as you do that, you're not making any sense, really. Second, you have to realize that even a sinless human nature would need salvation because human nature is dependent upon all kinds of things to come into existence and even to maintain existence. Every one of us in this room is dependent on a vast web of communications and transportation to get our food. Not one of us is self-sufficient in food or water or electricity or the building or a car or the city of Santa Barbara. We're all dependent on lots and lots of things. So a human nature, even like Mary's, not affected by sin, is dependent. He would say contingent. It depends on other stuff to be, okay? So a contingent human nature, which is what we have, and Mary has, this contingent nature cannot be fulfilled unless it can live in God. God's nature is radically different. God is not contingent. God depends on nothing. That's one of the points of being God. And we know that from the book of Exodus when God reveals God's name, I am who am. In other words, using philosophical terms, I am not dependent on anything to be. I am. Jesus uses that term for himself, doesn't he, in John's gospel? Near the end of the gospel, when they question him, who are you anyway? And he says, before Abraham came to be, I am. He's quoting the book of Exodus. And that's why in John's gospel, they pick up rocks to stone him. They know what he means. He means I'm divine. So that's why they're going to kill him. God does not depend on things to be, humans do. So a human nature cannot be united with a radically different nature unless something helps that happen. We don't have the ability. We're contingent. So clearly human nature, even before the sins of Adam and Eve, their nature, before their sin, needed Christ to reach the ultimate goal, which is union with the divine. No human nature can reach union with the divine on its own. If you think it can, I'm telling you, you're living in fantasy land, because our nature is radically different from divine nature. We cannot do that. However, Christ can do that. So, this is the reason for the incarnation, to help human nature be united with God. Human nature with divine nature. As Scotus says, we needed a kind of ladder to do that. I would say it's more like a bridge. We need that bridge to cross that chasm of non-contingency because we're contingent. So Christ provides it. That's why the incarnation happens. The incarnation does not happen because of sin. And I hear that all the time, that people think it does. Even in some Christmas songs, we get this stuff about Jesus came forth to die because of sinful people. Well, I mean, he did save us from sin through his death on the cross. Yes, he did. But he didn't have to. That could have been done any way God chose to do. It was not a requirement. And people often think it was. People think kind of like this. Let me act it out a little bit, okay? Okay, many thousand years ago, humans decided to go with sin, this disintegration, okay? God was really, really mad at them for doing that, okay? So here are the humans down here, I'll be God, and I'm just sort of, I'm so fed up with these stupid creatures, okay? And several thousand years later, this is how we think very often. Somebody pulls on my outfit. Hey, Father, yes, son. You know what? If I'm tortured to death, you'll be satisfied, and then humans can get into heaven. Well, okay, son, go ahead and let's have you tortured to death. That's hideous. But this is what people think. It's wretched. And one of the worst things about it is it puts you, humans, all of us, in the driver's seat. We made God do something. No, we didn't. Don't be stupid. We don't force God to do things. It's all because God chooses to do, not because of anything about us. So, Josie, you got a question?
Yes, well, isn't the problem the fact that St. Anselm is the main one that has this theory of...
Oh, I love it. You get an A in the class. Yay!
The atonement theory, which is completely about that until Abelard came along
Correct.
and changed that direction.
Yeah, Scotus is really going to run with what Abelard works on. Yeah. Okay. So St. Anselm, a medieval Benedictine before Scotus's time, St. Anselm was working with his cultural awareness issues. How do I figure out why did God become human? He wrote a work called Cur Deus Homo, Why Did God Become Human? Okay. His solution was divine justice. So in his world, 11th century, how do we solve things? When the peasant over here, peasant Barbara, has offended the Duchess over here, and Barbara cannot possibly repay the Duchess what she owes. Okay, so the Duchess just says, oh, well, okay, I'll let you off, Barbara, you peasant. Noblesse oblige, right? That's how that goes, right? I'll let you off. So Anselm uses that kind of legal system to figure out how this happens. It's in a direction. The problem with it that Anselm doesn't consider is that it keeps putting the human in the driver's seat. You see? It's not necessary to save humanity from sin to incarnate. It is not necessary. It is chosen. It is not necessary. And that is how we are saved, by that choice, if you will, of God. We have to use words like choosing with God because I can't think of anything else to use. God doesn't need choice because God lives in the eternal now. Okay? We have to think about choice because we have a past, a present, and a future. God doesn't have that issue. So the best we can do is use our brains and talk about a choice that God makes. So God has willed to come into human life and live as one of us, to save us from what we chose to do that caused all kinds of problems and still does. You got it? Yeah. So Scotus takes Anselm and goes beyond it and says, there's got to be a better solution. But Anselm was struggling in the right direction. He's trying to figure it out too. Scotus comes up a bit later. Okay. You might be interested to know that Junipero Serra was a professor of Scotist philosophy and theology at the University of Palma, Mallorca, before he came to the New World. So Junipero Serra would have known this stuff very well. Okay. So God did not plan the incarnation as a response to what humans did. The incarnation of Jesus is independent from sin. It's chosen whether or not humans chose sin. God was always going to come to be with creation, ourselves included. Why? Because all of creation, ourselves included, is contingent. There was a time when none of this was. So God has always wanted to bring creation back to God's self. That's why the incarnation is chosen. Now, the particular form of the incarnation, the Galilean peasant who gets tortured to death, is chosen by God as the best way to free us from the power of death and evil, even though we probably think otherwise. There must have been a better way. God didn't think so. This is pretty big stuff, and I hope you're getting it, because this is at the root of Franciscan spirituality, theology on Mary. God has chosen incarnation independent of the reality of sin. But the way the incarnation happens is around the issue of sin. Yes?
The first time I heard this was in Franciscan theology, and I was like, wow, that's really different. And so what I'm wondering is that a Catholic perspective?
Franciscans are Catholic.
I know, but is it like, is this idea about the incarnation uniquely Franciscan or
In its origin,
Catholic Church?
yeah, in its origin it was uniquely Franciscan. It has some roots in the eastern part of the empire, Syria and places like that, in Eastern theologians centuries before working on this same problem. So we see elements of this starting to come together. Anselm pops up in the Western Church. The one who really pulls all these raveling threads together and makes some sense out of it is Scotus, the Franciscan.
But are there other Catholic groups that
The
are
Jesuits,
doing
the
something
Jesuits agree with us. Yay! Yeah.
They don't all.
Now the whole church does, because the Immaculate Conception became official dogma in 1854. It's official teaching of the church that this is true of Mary. She is conceived without original sin in the womb of her mother.
Right, but the church doesn't necessarily, some of the church groups believe in atonement theology.
Yeah, some of them are more big on atonement. There are groups that really don't like Scotus too much and would prefer to kind of shove him over to the side. But John Paul II beatified Scotus partly for this reason, so that no Catholic group can say Scotus is a heretic. He's beatified. That means his writings are all orthodox, even if they don't always agree with everybody else. It was interesting, the Pope beatified him. People missed it, but that was a big moment when he did that. Yes.
Is it doctrine that Christ did not have to incarnate, but that he chose?
It's doctrine. It means it's teaching. Dogma is a higher level.
But it's official church teaching that...
This is Catholic teaching. Doesn't mean every Catholic group agrees with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's doctrine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the incarnation of Jesus is independent of sin. This strengthens a Christocentric spirituality. It's all about Christ. And weakens a sin-centric spirituality. It's all about sin. No, we're all about Christ. It also reminds us we do not manipulate God. Well, rats. I thought we could make God do stuff. Okay, well, we just can't. Okay. It's also true that sin has been chosen by humanity, and sin here I'll describe as a kind of disintegration, like your warm, fuzzy, close, friendly relationship with God is pulled apart somehow. And we get stories of that in the book of Genesis, with Adam and Eve in the garden and all that, okay? So our human nature is fallen, but in its original state, it enjoyed greater perfection. So it's natural to us to be better. This is why we don't like sin. It's not natural to us. We do it anyway, but it's not natural to us. So Jesus redeemed all human nature, even human nature whose ability to know and choose the good was not damaged. So Jesus would have redeemed Adam and Eve had they never chosen sin. Because they can't be absorbed, I shouldn't say absorbed, they can't come to live in the divine by nature. They can't because they're radically different. It's like, fire and water. You can't, one or the other is going to win out, but you're not going to have wet fire. It doesn't exist. But we can be taken into God. We have that ability. Amazing but true. So Christ served as Redeemer even for Adam and Eve before the choice for sin by making it possible that their human nature could be united with the divine nature. So Mary is saved by her son too. She still needs Christ. Remember, she's human. Period. Christ is human and divine. She still needs her son. Okay. So, Scotus argued the act of redemption worked for Mary is greater than the one worked for the rest of us, because the gift of preservation from sin is greater than the gift of restoration to grace. Practical example. Got a little kid at home, you're cooking on the stove, and the little kid wants to play with the hot pots and pans on the stove. Okay? I think everyone in this room would keep little Johnny or Susie away from the hot stove and the hot pans so they wouldn't get burned. That's the greater thing to do than let them play, get burned, and take them to the hospital. The better thing to do is keep them from getting hurt to begin with. That's what Christ does for his mother. She's protected so she doesn't get hurt by sin to begin with. Now, we haven't gotten to why yet. We're getting there. But she's protected from it. So that act of redemption is the greater act of redemption. For the rest of us, Christ helps us after the fact. For Mary, it's before. Now why? We'll get to that. Okay. So Mary needed the Savior. Her Immaculate Conception does not exempt her from this need, even though she did not commit sin. We all know that very young children who die are saved, even when there's no question of the possibility of a committed sin. If you think otherwise, go join another church, okay? But, like a 3-month-old kid who dies has committed a sin. Are you kidding? That's goofy, okay? But that 3-month-old child is affected by the presence of sin in the world, for sure. Diseases and all kinds of other things. That's all affecting the little one. But with no committed sin, they're saved because the incarnate God makes possible the union between divine nature and human nature. That's the reason for the incarnation. Union between human nature and divine nature. I think it makes sense, right? You got it? You can't do it without somebody, something, and that is Jesus Christ. So without Christ, our human nature would be doomed to be eternally frustrated because we could never reach our goal. There's no way to unite such radically different natures. It's like trying to make fire and water into the same thing. You can't do it. Okay. This is where I think religions who don't have a concept of Christ really have theologically a problem, because they're not grasping how different our nature is from the divine nature. You need this. Now, some people make the argument that it would show the saving power of Jesus better if Mary were just like the rest of us, that is, people affected by original sin. There are several problems with this line of thinking. First of all, remember, Jesus isn't just a really wonderful guy. Okay? He's way more than that. Way more, incomparably more. He's both God and man. As God, he's a source of grace, perfection, and is the highest good. How could the source of grace, perfection, and the highest good exist within a vessel of sin? It doesn't make any sense. It would be like creating a really nice meal for somebody, like you learned how to do, I don't know, Chateaubriand or something, and you're serving it to your guests, but you put it on dirty plates. Ugh. The dirty plate doesn't enhance the food, okay? The food may be spectacular, but you've ruined the meal by putting it on the dirty plate, okay? So you don't put the fullness of grace stuck in a vessel of sin, because that would drive out any sin. The two are not comparable. They don't work together. Yes?
I was just sitting here trying to figure out, why was it important for these concepts to be discussed in the 6th century? I mean, who was going to be affected by the outcome?
All of us would be affected, because it says a lot about who we are as humans. If you really believe that everybody in this room really is just cosmic trash, well, then you treat them like that.
In those days, was there an acceptance of all people? I mean,
Nope.
You had the poor, you had people who were slaves, you had women who were subservient.
Yeah, slaves were not considered human. They weren't humans in that world. They were tools. You can't do that to people if you buy this way of thinking, can you? Yeah. Yeah, and think of what we did in our country in the 1840s and 50s with slavery. Had we bought this line of thinking as Christians, slavery would have never existed. But we didn't buy it. And in many ways, we still don't. There are people all over the world that think that others are inferior. It's really a problem. So I think this is one of the antidotes to that, at least from the world of theology and spirituality. There are other ways to deal with it too, but this is a theological way and spiritual way. Everyone is a gift. And these gifted humans, along with the gifted caterpillars and grass and wind and everything else, are all meant to be caught up again into God. So none of this is created to be cosmic trash. So let's treat it like something. Yeah, you got it. It's a good question. Thank you for your insight. Secondly, consider what the Bible tells us about the presence of the holiness of God, even in a manufactured object like the Ark of the Covenant. In 2 Samuel, King David asks how it is that the Ark of God would come to him. Instead, he sent the Ark to another place for 3 months. See, these stories are giving you a glimpse into what is coming in God's revelation. So King David gets, the ark there's something extraordinarily holy about this, and I'm not worthy to have that around me. David says, in effect, who am I that the ark of God should come to me? That is echoed in the gospel, isn't it? When Elizabeth says to Mary, and who am I that the mother of my Lord should come to me? The women at that point are echoing the prophecy of the Old Testament. Intriguing, isn't it? Okay. In Luke 1:43 and 56, the story is paralleled, like I just said. Elizabeth asks how it is that the mother of my Lord should come to her. For an older relative to address a younger relative in this manner would be unheard of in the cultural world of ancient Israel. That was really cheeky and weird. The older relative was always considered more important than the younger, always. Elizabeth flips it. Her younger relative is more important than her. It's extraordinary that this comes up. And then Mary stays with Elizabeth for 3 months. King David in the ark, he kept it away from him for how long? Guess what? 3 months. Okay. For the very early Christians, remember, the Old Testament was Scripture. They would have recognized such parallels immediately. We have to be told them because we're losing a lot of our knowledge of the Old Testament. They had it right there, right in front of them. There are many such parallels, many more than that. This is just an example, okay? In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 30, we are told to reverence the sanctuary of the Lord. how much more should we reverence the dwelling place of God? Mary. God literally lived in her body. See, I think you're getting some sense of the Franciscan push on Mary here, because it's making Scripture come alive when you consider this. The Israelites were told to profess reverence for the sanctuary, later the temple, in which the ark was placed, and profess their love for God, not choose one or the other. In 2 Samuel 6, Uzzah, the son of Abinadab, dies for merely touching the ark. Whoa, stay back. David was moved to ask how the ark could come to him, since Uzzah died merely for touching it. That's in the book of Samuel. Now, more directly on Mary, less of an allusion to her, but getting more obvious. In Luke chapter 1, verse 28, the angel greets Mary and gives her the title full of grace or highly favored. Okay. The Greek verb construction here is important. The Greek word used is kaikariotomini, particular way of constructing a verb in Greek. It is a past perfect. Okay, an example of a past perfect in English. I went to the store and bought a Coke. This thing happened. It's done. I can't do anything more to it. I can't make it more store-ish or Coke-ish. It's done. I bought it. Got it? You can't change it. It's absolute. It's complete. It's a past perfect. It's perfect, perfectly done. You can't do more Cokey and story. It's done. Okay? You understand, I think, right? That's a past perfect. Okay. A past perfect is used here in the Greek when the angel addresses Mary. This means that the action of grace or favor is completed absolutely in the person addressed. I think you got it now. So, to make it even a little better translation, you could say, hail filled with grace. Full of grace, good. Filled with grace pushes it a little more right to the perfect. It's absolutely done. You can't make more of it. It's done. So hail filled with grace. Not 99.9% filled. Geez, full. One more drop and it'll spill over. It can't take anymore. Okay? It's a past perfect. Keep this in mind. Nowhere else in Scripture does an angel pay homage to a human in this way. This is the only place. Humans honor angels in the Scripture. Here, an angel honors a human. And the Greek translation is a past perfect besides, meaning gifted. You've got all spiritual gifts in you, Mary. I can't put in any more because there's no more room. You are absolutely filled and completed with spiritual gifts. That's biblical.
Excuse me.
Yes.
When we say the Hail Mary, should we change the word?
In my mind, full of grace is pretty good.
But we could, should we change?
In my mind, I know it means absolutely filled, but then it gets pretty wordy, doesn't it? Yeah. But you know what it means now. It means there's no room for any more. It's already done. Yeah. We don't have a good word. We don't have a past perfect participle like Greek does. So we do the best we can in our language. So in Revelation 19 and 22, St. John bows down before an angel to pay homage. Mary does not. Instead, the angel honors her with this unique title. Elizabeth tells her she is most blessed among women. That's another past perfect. You've got more blessing than any other woman, ever. That's Luke 1:42. Clearly, Mary is unique in the Bible. She's not like anybody else. There is no one else in the Bible that carries God in their body. So, to say she ought to be like everybody else, well, I'm sorry, she's not. And that's biblical. That's not my personal opinion. It's all there in Scripture. But if you don't do your homework, for example, on Greek, and believe me, I don't sit around studying Greek verbs all the time by any means, but if you don't do your homework on some significant passages like this, you really miss a lot. And this one's really important to get it. Since the early Christian author wrote that Greek verb that way, that means a lot in theology and your spirituality. She's filled, absolutely, already done. Okay. Now, as Scotus noted, it would be better to make a mistake of excess in regard to the possibilities of God's goodness than to be too deficient. Finally, he noted that his theology of Mary is logically possible. It would certainly be appropriate for God to act this way, and the Church's tradition in Scripture, theology, practice, had many elements of support for it. So he came up with a Latin phrase of 3 words, decuit potuit ergo fecit. Decuit, it's appropriate. Potuit, God could do it, ergo fecit, therefore God did it. Okay? And that's how his students remembered what he was teaching them. That was like the shorthand or the Cliff's Notes. Because remember, they would write in Latin, decuit potuit ergo fecit. Oh yeah, I can remember. Okay, now the pieces of this are the following. All right? It's like an outline. So it's been used by the friars for centuries as a shorthand way to remember this basic theology of Mary, which is deeply rooted in Scripture. That's why we think Mary is so important as an order. And over the centuries, certainly the Jesuits have agreed with us on this line of thought, and other groups over time too. And Immaculate Conception became an article, a dogma, actually in 1854. But Scotus was teaching it in 1300 already. But here in California, for example, when our neighboring mission to the north here, La Purissima, was founded in the 1700s, it was not dogma yet, so we couldn't give it the title Inmaculada Concepcion. They were allowed to give it the title the most pure, Purissima. And it's still known as La Purissima. But the friars, Spanish friars, couldn't give it the name Inmaculada Concepcion. They had to give it a little less and call it Purissima. So roughly 75 years later, we finally won the battle on the dogma. But at that point, we hadn't quite won yet. It's interesting to note that just in our backyard, we have something like that that reveals this issue going on. Okay, so we have just about 10 or 15 minutes left. A few more questions at this point? Gloria, yes?
Would you explain the large or small difference between doctrine and dogma?
Yeah. Dogma is really clearly defined. Some things happen. For example, Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That's dogma. Stop. Doctrine, how do you explain that? That's the doctrine. There are different ways to get at it. Yeah. Doctrine is what you're teaching. Dogma is the kernel, the thing that you are trying to get across.
And that's why there's not so many differences.
Exactly. Yeah, precisely right. Yeah. So doctrine is more fluid, dogma is more solidified. Yeah, please.
When you were talking about Mary's having a perfect will and a perfect intellect.
Human.
But is that to say that they were one?
It was to say they worked in harmony.
They were harmonious.
Yeah, they were integrated. They were working harmoniously. Yes. So when the angel speaks to Mary, she's thinking at I think a more profound level than you and I can do in this room, because our minds and our wills are kind of messed up by sin. Hers is not.
They would always agree.
Yeah, they would be in harmony. Yeah, they would be in harmony. Because, not affected by original sin, because she literally has God in her body, And to be a vessel of sin and hold the fullness of grace, you can't do that. It doesn't make any sense.
We need to get there.
And the pledge and promise to us is that we will, because God has made it real again in her. Yeah. Yes.
So she was conceived in
Her mother's womb.
grace and fullness of grace and that perfection. So was she conceived through sexual intercourse?
Yes. There's nothing sinful about sexual intercourse.
That seems like a big deal,
Mm-hmm.
like theologically, because, Christ was conceived as her
Through the
spouse
Spirit,
with
through the
Holy
Spirit.
Spirit, so
Right.
the virgin birth.
Because
so
God
Mary
is-
being conceived in that perfection, but through sexual intercourse, it just seems like that makes that union holy.
Isn't it amazing?
And, you don't hear enough about that. I feel like
Yeah.
that.
I think a lot of times because people mix up Immaculate Conception with the conception of Jesus. They
Right.
get the two jumbled in their heads, and they're two different things. Okay, other things? Please.
So when we pray, it's always best to ask for God's will,
I think so.
because just to ask for something doesn't mean it's God's will for us.
You're so right. Yeah. But we sure try to make God's will our will, don't we?
It has to be integrated.
Yeah. And you notice it's disintegrated a lot, right? Yeah, we're really struggling, aren't we? So St. Bonaventure talks about it like original sin has affected us in a way. So he did an image for people, like it's like we're walking. We're trying to look at something over there, but we're walking like this. We're still walking, and we can still see, but we can't stand upright. Oh, it's over there, So this is, again, why in Catholic theology we're damaged by original sin. We're not ruined. We're damaged. Yeah, there's a big difference. Yeah, and Luther, for example, he used, he could get rather crude at times. He is a good theologian, but he gets off on a number of things, and this is one of the things he really blew it on, I think. So his understanding of humans in a sermon, he said to people, you are like a manure pile, and Jesus is like snow that falls and covers it, so God the Father doesn't see that you're a pile of blank. Okay? That's what you call a negative anthropology.
So he didn't say we are, he said you are.
Well, he included himself.
Oh, he did.
Oh, yeah. But I just think it's really, really bad theology. So much of what he did was really good, but some things he really got wrong, and that's one of them, in my humble opinion. And it's probably one reason why he really attacked the Franciscans a lot. And but that's a whole nother story. Reformation is interesting stuff. And one of our Dominican professors told us years ago, the classic definition of heresy is that it's 90% right. But where it's wrong, it's really wrong. Okay. Yes.
When you were talking about how God chooses and he doesn't need to do things, do you think that when we pray, it's more effective if we offer God a choice?
I think it's more effective. I think Gloria nailed it pretty well. Ask God's will to be fulfilled. And how can I help? Rather than, oh God, make the sun shine the rest of the afternoon.
But in the Lord's Prayer, the line is, thy will
Be done. Yeah, not my will.
thy will.
Yeah,
Oh, I was wrong.
yeah. I think that was a good way to bring up. Yeah, it's about God's will. More than mine. Even though mine's right, come on. Okay. Please, again, Josie.
According to what I learned in Ignatian spirituality, that the importance of having this relationship with God and telling God your deepest desires, so that relationship and that conversation can, in fact, bring God. I'm not saying manipulating. I'm talking about what you feel in the deepest desires of your heart, so that eventually that is God's will. In other words, that eventually that becomes an understanding, I guess.
Yeah, you're working toward each other.
Yes,
Yeah, and you like to get to this point.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Would you explain the crucifixion?
Yeah, why do it?
Yeah, well, that's where I'm going.
Okay, well, I can only struggle with it myself because I know theologically it is not necessary for redemption. It is chosen,
By who?
God,
Okay.
but it's not necessary. God could redeem just by willing redemption.
Okay.
Yeah. So God chooses that. The best I can get at it is the cross is chosen to reveal the depth of the self-giving of God. It's like, how could I go any farther convincing you that I give myself for you than this? And maybe that kind of slaps us on the side of the head and says, oh my God, you really are good, better than I thought, you know. Maybe. But it is a struggle. And remember, even Jesus prays with his human mind, remember, anything but not this, please. But he does it. Yeah, and in the incarnation, please remember, he really did take on a human body. It wasn't a costume party. You know, he didn't just wear a human body and walk around with God brain, because God doesn't have a brain, okay? So he really worked with the limits of a human body. It's astonishing.
We've come a long way in our theology.
Yeah.
In the 70s and 80s, it was just different, or maybe I just didn't understand.
Well, it was more sin-centric, I think. At least what we got as kids was more sin-centric. Yeah, and it really is not Christocentric. We're trying to get this shift to start happening in the whole church. Let's get more focused on who Christ is, and then get the other stuff in order, and get sin out of the middle of the picture. It's real. Don't forget it. But the middle of the picture is Christ. Yeah.
I forgot, I left out a key term about prayer, and it has to do with what you spoke earlier and mentioned, the discernment process. That's what I meant, is what brings us closer.
Discernment process,
And
yeah.
then- And eventually it becomes, it's not just a petition or a prayer, it is an actual process in which eventually you feel God's will.
I think you said it well, yeah. As prayer becomes more mature, it becomes part of a discernment process. What is God's will and how can I help, rather than, oh God, give me a nice candy bar, a spiritual candy bar, you know. You gradually start changing, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we, in the prayers for the faithful, we ask for specific things.
Mm-hmm.
So why not say, God, please exercise your will?
Yeah. I think it would be, what you said I think is a good idea theologically, to tweak those a bit, because it sounds a little bit like we're making God the great candy machine in the sky. You know, if we put in a certain amount of prayers and pull the trigger, we get what we wanted.
But we always say if
We don't always say it. Yeah, yeah. If it be your will. That's the prayer of Christ. I don't want this, please don't make this happen, but if it be your will, yeah. Yes.
I must confess that I am extremely ignorant of all of this,
Okay.
even though I grew up in the faith and so
Mhm.
forth. Would you recommend a basic text that I can read to start?
Yes.
What a good question.
Yes. She's asking about where can I start reading about a lot of this stuff. Well, your wonderful parish faith formation person, Donna, hi. Donna has copied some things for you, some handouts. She's going to go get them. And also there's some books, but there are also some short handouts that we have for you. This particular book, written by Sister Rosemary Stetz, she's a Franciscan, I really like this. I don't agree with absolutely everything in it, but I agree with a lot in it. It's called Franciscan Field Guide. It's about people, places, practices, and prayers. So I don't know if they have it or not. I just think it's really an excellent little book. A lot of good stuff in it, published by Franciscan Media out of Cincinnati. There's a copy. I'll leave a copy up here on the table. There's a couple more copies. Another one, Father Murray Bodo is doing a lot of writing for Franciscan World over the years. A Franciscan celebration of Mary. It's called Nourishing Love. Really nicely put together. So those are some things to consider. And Donna is coming around now with a couple of handouts. One of them is the Catholic Update. This Catholic Update discusses the Incarnation, noticed by a Jesuit, because we and the Jesuits agree on this. The reason for the Incarnation is not sin, okay? The Incarnation happens in a particular way because of sin. It's not the reason for the Incarnation. So this one by Ken Overberg is really nicely put together. SJ, Society of Jesus, yeah. And let me see some of those others, Donna, when you get around here, so I can tell them about it. Okay, another one on the Christmas creche. This one, there's a Franciscan article in it in which this friar claims that Francis invented the nativity scene. He did not. We've known that for years, but nice ideas die hard when you really want them to be true, okay? He did reinvent it. He didn't invent it, he reinvented it, he repopularized it. There were groups at the time before Francis that were making these ridiculous pageants, for example, at Christmas time. We have records of a priest in Poland coming to the altar at Christmas Mass dressed as an ostrich. You know, I mean, it was just crazy, okay? So they were banned. Stop. So Francis re-enlivens it. That's what he does. And he keeps it more focused on this historic event and less on fantasy. So Francis really did bring it back into practice, but he did not invent it. Yeah.
I don't know if you want to answer this, but this is off the subject.
Okay.
But about Vatican II.
About Vatican II.
And the Mass.
Mm-hmm.
Latin Mass.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that because it's a whole different field. Latin Mass and Vatican II, not today. Okay, thanks though. Okay. And I believe, Donna, I believe also there was a, did they get that article on Mary and Scripture? Okay. So this one, thank you. I can use it as Exhibit A. Thank you. Okay. This one I put together for you after lots and lots of research. This is Marian ideas popping up in the history of the church, early practices, documents that aren't in the Bible, things like this, and also later theologians and all that kind of stuff, and a whole bunch of biblical quotes that relate to things about, for example, miraculous births, angels talking to humans, gospel accounts, all these kinds of things. I've got that all for you here in that document. Saves you oodles of time, believe me, if you want to try to look that stuff up. Okay, so we've been at it for an hour, and it's time to let you go. But I hope you got some basics now, some foundational stuff, incarnation and the role of Mary. Got it? Yay, okay.